So sometime last year, I made a video about Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, talking about how his character arc is one of the best written arcs of any character in any form of fictional media, and I still hold to that. His motivations, his struggles, his downfall, and his eventual redemption were all handled in a really fantastic and organic way, and I honestly cannot say enough good things about it. But I think today I want to shift the focus to another member of the Fire Nation royal family, someone whose own character arc is quite fascinating and well done in and of itself, but who was also quite instrumental in forming who Zuko was as a person. His sister, Azula. Now, in that video, I talked about a whole lot of factors that made Zuko who he was and informed his motivations, but something that was fairly important for all of that I didn't really touch on all that much, aside from how he got his scar, obviously, was the very not healthy at all dynamic of the royal family overall, and trust me when I tell you that that dynamic is crucial to Azula's character, as well as her eventual undoing. And just like I said in the Zuko video, if for some reason you haven't watched Avatar: The Last Airbender yet, big time heckin' spoilers ahead!
You're like my sister. Everything always came easy to her. She's a fire-bending prodigy, and everyone adores her. My father says she was born lucky. He says I was lucky to be born.
A character's introduction is crucial to how they're perceived. I might do a separate video on this in the future, but when you introduce a character, especially a villain, the first impression is more often than not the lasting impression, so you want to be sure that you get it right with your villains. Now, technically speaking, the first we ever saw of Azula was back in Book 1, Episode 12, The Storm, where she could be briefly seen during Zuko's Agni Kai against his father, you know, the one where Ozai straight up burned his son and then banished him for speaking out of turn. Yeah, that one. She could be seen in the crowd next to Uncle Iroh being way too happy about the fact that her own brother was having his face burned by their father in front of everybody. Like, she was way too into this. Like, reel it back, Azula. Reel it back. All kidding aside though, this one little moment before we even knew her name was enough to put across her cruel, almost sadistic personality, something we'd see more of later on. During part 2 of the season 1 finale, The Siege of the North, Zuko tells an unconscious Aang about his sister and how everything always came easy to her, echoing his father's hurtful words that she was born lucky, while Zuko was lucky to be born. And at the end of that episode, we got one final tease for Azula as Fire Lord Ozai, having heard of Zuko and Iroh's actions at the North Pole, bestows the task of their capture to a mysterious person, who ended up being the girl who gleefully watched Zuko's burning, his sister, Princess Azula. Just those small teases and tidbits of information were enough to lay the foundation of a future antagonist, but her first actual proper scene in the show is what truly sealed the deal. Immediately, just in the first few seconds of this scene, you can see how much more revered and probably feared Princess Azula is as opposed to Zuko. While Zuko definitely had a ship and some presumably low-ranking guards and crew, most of them likely joined on the hunt for the Avatar purely out of respect for General Iroh. Azula, on the other hand, is carried out onto the deck of a much more elegant ship, being bowed down to by almost 24 members of the Fire Nation Royal Guard before she even steps out of her palanquin. She then gives a short speech to her guards, making it clear that Zuko and Iroh's actions at the North Pole made them enemies, regardless of their royal heritage, and that anyone who hesitated to do their duty would suffer Azula's wrath. She's then told by the ship's captain that the tides wouldn't allow them to bring the ship in before nightfall, after which Azula simply asks him, "Do the tides command this ship?" After the captain confirms that no, they do not, Azula really heavily implies that she's gonna throw him overboard to his death without a second thought if he doesn't bring the ship in when she commanded, which, yeah, kinda leaves the captain with the one option, doesn't it? Right away, in less than 2 minutes of screen time, you know so much about Azula's character, her motivations, her personality, and what she expects from those around her. She's calm and calculating, but also cold and cruel, and will accept nothing less than absolute cooperation and success from those in her command. And trust me when I tell you, those kind of traits do not come from nowhere.
And he considers you a miserable failure for not finding the Avatar. Why would he want you back home, except to lock you up where you can no longer embarrass him?
As the show went on, we got more insight into how Azula, and Zuko for that matter, were molded and influenced by the other members of their family. While Zuko was always looked down upon by their father Ozai for being a mediocre firebender, Azula was always described as nothing less than a prodigy, being able to master firebending techniques far faster than Zuko and impressing Ozai with her seemingly boundless talent and cunning. Of course, that sense of superiority wasn't lost on Azula by any means, who didn't hesitate to rub it in Zuko's face every chance she got, and that superiority complex was likely only nurtured by Ozai, who only ever saw his children as tools to be used or a means to an end. Of course, Ozai and Azula being so close probably had something to do with the careless attitude she displayed towards the rest of her family. When Iroh sent the letter from the warfront during a siege of Ba Sing Se, Azula's first thought was whether Ozai would become heir to the throne if Iroh didn't come back alive. When Ozai begged his father, Fire Lord Ozai, to revoke Iroh's birthright after Iroh's son died in the siege, Azula watched the ensuing fallout between Ozai and Azulon with gleeful excitement. And Azula was the first person to tell Zuko that Ozai had been ordered to kill his own son as retaliation for what he had requested, but the way she said it wasn't the way you'd expect a well-adjusted person to tell their brother that their father was literally going to murder them.
Dad's going to kill you. Really, he is.
No concern, no fear whatsoever for her brother's safety, just a mockery of Zuko's impending demise. What kind of person does that? Ozai obviously favored Azula due to her superior firebending skills, and those two being so close only meant that Ozai's ambitious and power-hungry nature rubbed off on her, especially without the influence of her mother, Fire Lady Ursa, but we'll get to that.
I thought you ran off and joined the circus. You said it was your calling.
Well, Azula called a little louder.
Now, all of that from the last segment isn't to say that Azula was completely without friends or allies outside of Fire Lord Ozai. In fact, she had two very close friends. Ty Lee, a circus acrobat turned martial artist with a talent for chi blocking, and May, a stoic and brooding girl who was the daughter of a governor and had a very proficient self-taught skill with throwing knives. They had all met during their time at the Royal Fire Academy for Girls to become friends, but based on the way that Azula treated them throughout the show, I can't imagine their friendship started very differently from what we saw. When we first get introduced to Ty Lee, it's when Azula seeks to recruit her for the mission to capture Zuko and Iroh, but when Ty Lee turned her down, Azula attended a show at the circus where Ty Lee performed, and she demanded that the ringmaster make Ty Lee's act so incredibly dangerous that Ty Lee ended up basically agreeing to go with Azula out of fear for her own life. Later, during a flashback, we see a young Ty Lee showing off her acrobatic skills, only for a jealous Azula to push her over and laugh after she fell. And this wouldn't be the last time she would show jealousy towards Ty Lee either. During the Book 3 episode, The Beach, Azula flat out admits she was jealous of all the attention Ty Lee was getting from the boys on Ember Island, and this episode is where we really get to see how Azula's sequestered upbringing as a princess really stunted her social skills, not really knowing how to just casually interact with other people her own age, and especially not how to flirt with people she was attracted to.
That's a sharp outfit, Chan. You could puncture the hull of an Empire-class Fire Nation battleship, leaving thousands to drown at sea. Because it's so sharp.
That second part really gets hammered home when, after sharing a brief kiss with a boy named Chan, her declaration that the two of them would become the most powerful couple in the world and, quote, dominate the Earth, sends Chan scurrying away in fear. I don't know, personally, I'd save my aspirations for world domination for like the third date. All of this is really just to say that Ozai raising Azula to be not much more than a cold, calculating war machine did her absolutely no favors when it came to just being a person. It's what her dad instilled in her, so that's all she knew.
Almost perfect. One hair out of place.
Almost isn't good enough.
Azula usually kept a calm and focused, if not a little sadistic, demeanor in most situations, fighting her enemies with a focused precision that she would train constantly to maintain, always with the mindset that almost isn't good enough. This absolute control and desire for perfection went hand in hand with a lust for power, and her trademark blue fire is probably the best visual metaphor for Azula's drive and ambition. Blue fire does burn hotter and brighter than red fire after all, and Azula always sought to be better than everyone else around her at literally everything ever. Going back to the episode The Beach, Azula points out the slight hesitation of one foot of one of the opponents in the game of Kawaii Ball, speculating it's from a past injury and ordering the others to focus their serves toward that side in order to win. And once Azula does win, which I might add she does in a show of complete overkill for a simple pickup game, she proclaims victory in perhaps the most Azula way possible.
Yes! We've defeated you for all time! You will never rise from the ashes of your shame and humiliation! That was fun.
But that's really just another example of how Azula's drive, her ambition, her competitiveness, and her lust for power and dominance informed her every motivation. She wanted to be the best, the smartest, the fastest, the most revered, all to live up to the expectations set forth by her father Ozai, who she viewed as a symbol of perfection and absolute power, two traits that served as her driving force in life, and, as we'd see later on, she really couldn't handle when circumstances arose that were out of her control.
You miscalculated. I love Zuko more than I fear you.
No, you miscalculated. You should have feared me more.
So I pose to you a question. What happens when someone raised their entire life to be cunning, precise, calculating, manipulative, and ambitious to the point of being power-hungry, someone with absolute control and power over all things in their life suddenly loses that control? We saw several times throughout the series that Azula so needed to be in control of a situation, so felt entitled to wield that kind of power due to her status as a princess, that she literally threatened to kill people who stepped out of line without a second thought or even a glimmer of remorse. But what about someone who she actually considered a friend? You know, honestly, in spite of the way she would treat Mei and Ty Lee most of the time, I do genuinely believe she regarded them as her friends. So much so that when Mei helped Zuko, Sokka, and a few others escape the prison on the Boiling Rock, Azula, for probably one of the only times in her life up to that point, was visibly confused, even hurt. Hurt at the thought that someone she called a friend would turn her back on Azula, especially for the sake of Zuko, who Azula had always been told she was better than. And in that moment where Mei proclaims that she loves Zuko more than she feared Azula, Azula momentarily snapped, losing all semblance of control and focus, wanting nothing more than to lash out at her friend, to hurt her, maybe even kill her, until she was again betrayed, this time by Ty Lee, who blocked Azula's chi to save Mei's life. The two were shortly thrown in prison and left to rot, but it was clear that this incident would have a lasting detrimental effect on Azula's psyche, whether she ever saw them again or not. The very next episode, Azula attacked Team Avatar at the Western Air Temple with about half a dozen Fire Nation airships, specifically wanting to kill Zuko. But unlike their previous encounters, where Azula was precise and laser-focused, outmatching Zuko at almost every turn, this time she was maniacal and erratic, and Zuko was able to match her move for move, that loss of control weakening her combat skills and giving way to the first signs of her gradual mental collapse. Just before Fire Lord Ozai was set to carry out his plan to use the power boost from Sozin's comet to burn the entire Earth Kingdom, he informed Azula that, despite what she assumed, she would not be coming with him. This devastated Azula, and we once again saw her lose all composure for a moment, yelling at her father and demanding to know why she was being treated like Zuko. Ozai then said that, as he would become the Phoenix King, Azula would be crowned the new Fire Lord in his stead, and while this proposition did appease Azula momentarily, there's no denying that what Ozai did in that moment eroded the last bit of trust she had in anyone. I mean, think about it. Even after Mei and Ty Lee betrayed her on the Boiling Rock, Azula believed she could always rely on her father, Ozai, the one who instilled in her the drive, the ambition, the ruthlessness that had fueled every decision she had ever made. Ozai, the person who single-handedly made her the person she was. Ozai, who she probably believed was the only person who loved her, was now, by leaving her behind on his final conquest, telling her that she had let him down, that she wasn't his equal, that he was ashamed of her, maybe even afraid of her.
None of them could be trusted. Sooner or later, they all would have betrayed me. Just like May and Ty Lee did.
Of course, if anyone was scared during the final days before Sozin's Comet's return, it was Azula herself. Azula banished a servant girl because there was a pit in one of her cherries, followed by Azula banishing the entirety of the Dai Li because they were 5 minutes late to a meeting, and lastly, she tried forcing her old firebending masters, Lo and Li, into an Agni Kai simply for showing concern for her well-being and suggesting they postpone her coronation. And that's just what we saw on screen. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but by the time she was about to be crowned Fire Lord, there was basically no one at the palace aside from her and the fire sages. You would think that the ascension of the crowned princess to the position of Fire Lord, which would have made her the first known female Fire Lord ever, would have drawn a slightly better crowd. Even during the events leading up to the coronation, Azula was not okay, and things were about to get much worse. Up until this point, you might have noticed that I blatantly avoided talking about the influence that Azula's mother, Fire Lady Ursa, might have had in her life, and that's because it was virtually non-existent. And yeah, sure, Ursa did try to make Azula see the error of her ways and keep her in line when she was around, but it didn't really seem to prove very useful because, well, Azula just kept being the same cruel, callous little brat that she always was. It certainly didn't help that Ursa seemed to gravitate more towards the scrappy and determined Zuko, who didn't show any of the malice or cruelty that Azula did, making Azula believe that Ursa not only didn't love her, but that she saw Azula as nothing more than a monster. And because Ursa was banished from the Fire Nation for aiding in Ozai's plot to take the throne, something she only did if Ozai would spare Zuko's life, Azula could never gain any sort of maternal love or nurturing from Ursa ever again. She only had Ozai to rely on for any sort of affection, and she could only gain that by being the absolutely perfect daughter by his absurd standards. So now, when Ursa, or at least a hallucination of Ursa in the mirror, appeared to Azula just before her coronation as Fire Lord, Azula just assumed that her belief that her mother thought she was some irredeemable monster would be confirmed, but she showed concern for her daughter's well-being, wanting nothing but the best for her, saying that she loved Azula, and Azula responded by shattering the mirror, breaking down into tears. Azula had so convinced herself that her mother hated her, or even feared her, that the thought that Ursa might have cared for her, even loved her, created such a drastic and self-perpetuating conflict in her mind, one that she was absolutely not in a position to cope with, that it only further fueled her downward spiral. And the worst part of it all is that maybe somewhere deep down, Azula really did long for her mother's love and acceptance, but because of Ursa's disappearance so early in her formative years, it was obviously something that Azula could never have.
I'm sorry it has to end this way, brother.
No, you're not.
So what if she didn't have friends? So what if she banished most of the people in the capital city? So what if her father left her behind to go on his big intercontinental cookout? She would still become the Fire Lord and prove Ozai wrong, and become the greatest leader in Fire Nation history! Right? Just before she was officially crowned, Zuko and Katara crashed the coronation, and Azula responded in a manner really unbecoming of her, challenging Zuko to an Agni Kai for the throne. Now, you would think this would be right in Azula's wheelhouse, separating Zuko from his ally to pick him off in a one-on-one fight, knowing that he had never actually bested her before, but if you think about it, the Azula of Book 2 and early Book 3 would have just had the overwhelming force of the Fire Nation army rain doom and destruction upon these two intruders. Azula's attacks were wild and ferocious, nothing like the precise, measured attacks she would use in their previous bouts, while Zuko was able to fend off her attacks and overpower his sister. Azula was so incapable of thinking clearly and strategically like she used to that Zuko was even able to goad Azula into shooting lightning at him, knowing full well that he was going to redirect it at her, because he literally said that's what his plan was.
No lightning today? What's the matter? Afraid I'll redirect it?
I'll show you lightning!
She did have enough presence of mind to aim her shot at Katara instead, forcing Zuko to improperly redirect the lightning and injure himself in the process, leaving Azula able to easily overpower Katara, but Katara completely outplayed Azula, tricking her into standing over a water grate so that she could use the water below them to chain Azula to the grate, completely subduing her in the process. And in that moment, Azula snapped. She started thrashing about on the ground, spewing out fire in every possible direction, before finally collapsing and sobbing, feeling that last little bit of her stability slip away. That breakdown is the culmination of everything up to this point. The superiority complex she felt over Zuko being proven false, her claim to the throne of Fire Lord being taken back by the rightful heir, being betrayed by her friends, being left behind by her father, being unable to cope with the abandonment she felt from her mother, being outdone and outwitted by someone she considered lower than her because of her status in life. All of those things collided inside of her fractured mind in that exact instant, and it utterly destroyed her. Honestly, the end of Azula's story in many ways is the antithesis of Zuko's. He struggled and suffered, but was ultimately able to defy what Ozai had instilled in him, overcome his strife, and redeem himself as a person. Meanwhile, all that Azula's effort and ambition and drive and lust for power had gotten her was this. Being reduced to a crying, powerless, defeated mess of a person. Knowing that she had lost, knowing that Zuko had won, knowing that she had lost all control. Well, that ending was kind of soul-crushing, wasn't it? Tell me what you think of Azula as a character in the comments below, and don't forget to give this video a like if you liked it. Also, if you see a little join button just below the video now, that's because memberships are now live for my channel, so you can check that out if you want to help support my content. No pressure though. See you in the next video, friendos.